There was something deeply wrong with that summer. In the rural villages of Europe, peasants looked to the sky waiting for the warmth that should have arrived weeks earlier. But the warmth did not come. The sun appeared, when it appeared at all, with a strange color, pale, almost orange, as if it were sick. And the cold refused to leave. It was the year 1816, and summer simply did not exist. In the region of New England, in the northeastern United States, farmers watched their corn crops die, frozen solid in the middle of July. In Canada, a snowstorm swept across Quebec in mid-June, burying what remained of hope for a good harvest under 12 inches of ice. In Switzerland, glaciers advanced over entire villages. In Ireland, an epidemic of typhus fever spread among a population already weakened by hunger. In China, rice rotted in flooded fields. In India, the monsoons arrived late and then with devastating force, spreading cholera throughout the Ganges Valley. The world had darkened, and the cause lay more than 15,000 kilometers away on an island in Indonesia that few in the West even knew existed. That year was real. It was 1816, and what caused it was not a war, not a plague, not the wrath of any god. It was pure geology, the awakening of a mountain. This is the story of the year without a summer. Hello, I am Dr. Arthur Kensington, and today I will tell you about one of the greatest natural disasters ever recorded in the history of humanity, the eruption of Mount Tambora, an event of worldwide magnitude that claimed the lives of tens of thousands of people, altered the climate of the entire northern hemisphere, devastated entire economies, killed livestock, destroyed crops, and plunged nations into famine, disease, and epidemics. What you are about to hear is not fiction. It is real history, and it changed the fate of millions of people. Stay with me until the end, because I have prepared a list of the 10 volcanoes that have killed the most people in world history. And if you enjoy history, science, and major events that shaped humanity, subscribe to the channel. We are at the beginning of this journey, and your participation is essential. To understand what happened in 1816, it is necessary to go back 1 year and travel to the other side of the planet. In April of 1815, on the island of Sumbawa, in the Indonesian archipelago, Mount Tambora awoke. The volcano had already been showing signs of unrest for 3 years. Small eruptions, tremors, smoke. The moderate activity had been ignored or normalized by the local inhabitants. After all, they lived in a region of active volcanoes. It was part of everyday life. But what happened between April 5th and April 10th, 1815 was anything but ordinary. The explosion that followed was classified as level 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a scale that ranges from 0 to 8, where each number represents 10 times more force than the previous one. Level 7 is called a supercolossal event. It was the largest volcanic eruption of the past 1,600 years, the greatest humanity had witnessed since it began recording history. The thunder of the explosion was heard more than 2,000 kilometers away on the island of Sumatra, as if it were a cannon being fired nearby. Columns of fire and ash rose more than 40 kilometers above the ground, piercing the troposphere and reaching the stratosphere, the layer of the atmosphere above the clouds where modern airplanes fly. The mountain, which had previously stood at 4,300 meters in altitude, lost nearly 1,300 meters of height in a matter of days. What remained was an enormous caldera, a crater opened like a wound at the top of the world. Pyroclastic flows, incandescent clouds of superheated gas, ash, and molten rock descended the slopes at speeds that made any escape impossible. Tsunamis formed and swept across nearby coastlines. It is estimated that between 60,000 and 71,000 people died as a direct consequence of the eruption, most from the Kia, famine, and diseases that followed the collapse of villages and local crops. Between 11,000 and 12,000 died in the explosion itself. But the local devastation, as immense as it was only the prologue. The true impact of Tambora was not in the flames that rushed down the mountain. It was in the invisible particles that rose into the sky. The eruption released between 100 and 150 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere: ash, rocks, debris. But the most decisive element was not solid, it was gaseous. Tambora expelled colossal quantities of sulfur dioxide. When this gas reaches the stratosphere, the layer of the atmosphere located between 12 and 50 kilometers in altitude, it reacts chemically with water vapor and forms sulfate aerosols, microscopic particles, too light to fall back quickly, yet dense enough to block the passage of light. These particles formed a veil, an almost invisible shield that enveloped the entire planet, like a filter placed between the Earth and the Sun. The effect was simple, yet immense in its consequences. Part of the sunlight was reflected back into space before reaching the surface. Less light, less heat, and the planet began to cool. The global average temperature dropped between 0.4 and 0.7 degrees Celsius. In some regions of the northern hemisphere, the decrease reached 2 or 3 degrees below normal. To someone hearing this today, it may seem insignificant. But in terms of global average temperature, this variation is enormous, enough to shift entire seasons, alter rainfall patterns, and destroy agricultural ecosystems that depended on predictable climate conditions to survive. The sky became strange. Accounts from the time describe sunsets of unsettling beauty, intense reddish and violet hues never seen before. The sun appeared pale during the day, as if it were behind frosted glass. There was a persistent haze that did not disappear with the wind, nor dissolve with the rain. It was the result of volcanic particles spread throughout the stratosphere, filtering and scattering light into wavelengths that produced that ghostly and unreal illumination. The world had literally gone dark. The climatic impact of the eruption was not immediate. The particles took months to spread throughout the stratosphere. But when the summer of 1816 arrived in the northern hemisphere, or should have arrived, the effect was at its peak. Summer simply did not appear. In New England, the northeastern United States and Canada, temperatures that under normal conditions would comfortably range between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius plunged to near zero or below. In May, frosts destroyed most of the newly sprouted crops. In June, 2 major snowstorms swept across eastern Canada and the northeastern United States, causing deaths and destroying what remained. Nearly 12 inches of snow were recorded in Quebec in mid-June. In July and August, the warmest months of the year in the northern hemisphere, ice was observed on lakes and rivers as far south as Pennsylvania. Snow fell in states such as New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire, regions where summer snow was an almost unheard of event. Temperatures fluctuated in absurd ways, One day, the heat would rise to 35 degrees Celsius. The next day, it would plunge below freezing within hours. It was as if the climate had gone mad. Americans gave that year a direct and bitter name: 1800, and froze to death. The crops had no chance. Most summer plants, corn, wheat, beans, have cell walls that rupture with even light frost. A snowstorm in July was a death sentence for any harvest. And without harvests, prices exploded. Oats, an essential commodity in an economy that depended on horses as the primary means of transportation, rose from 12 cents per bushel to 92 cents, nearly 8 times the original price. Wheat and corn followed similar trajectories. And in a world without proper roads, without railways, without rapid transportation logistics, there was no way to bring food from distant regions to cover the deficit. Each region was trapped in its own hunger. In Europe, the situation was even more severe, not only because of the cold, but because of the context. The continent was emerging from the Napoleonic Wars. More than 20 years of conflict had exhausted economies, destroyed infrastructure, displaced populations, and weakened governments. The Europe of 1816 was a body already wounded, trying to stand. And then Tambora cast upon it an endless winter. Constant rain and unseasonable cold destroyed grain harvests across northern Europe. Wheat rotted in the fields. Rye failed to mature. Potatoes, which had become the staple food of the continent's poor, were devastated by this combination of cold and excessive moisture. Scarcity was swift and brutal. In the United Kingdom and France, food riots erupted in the cities. Warehouses were looted. Bakeries were stormed. The anger of starving populations turned against merchants, against governments, against any symbol of abundance in a world of deprivation. In Switzerland, the violence was so intense that the government was forced to declare a state of emergency. Major storms caused flooding in Europe's principal rivers. In the eastern part of the country, an ice dam formed during the years 1816 and 1817, in the region between Guitro and Bagnes, impounding a lake that would eventually overflow and flood the valley below. In Ireland, the combination of famine and weakened immune systems created the perfect conditions for one of the worst typhus epidemics of the century. Between 1816 and 1819, it is estimated that 100,000 Irish people died. Bodies debilitated by hunger became fertile ground for disease. A BBC documentary based on Swiss estimates concluded that mortality rates in 1816 were double the historical average for that period, representing approximately 200,000 additional deaths in Europe alone. And there were phenomena no one could explain. In Hungary, reports describe snow-tinted brown falling over fields already battered by the cold. In Italy, red snow was recorded in several localities. It is now believed that the strange coloration was caused by volcanic ash still present in the atmosphere, tinting the flakes as they fell. For those living through it, without knowledge of volcanology, without access to science, without the ability to connect an explosion in Indonesia to an endless winter in Europe, what was happening seemed supernatural. Tambora's haze recognized no borders. Its effects spread across the entire planet, although historical records are more detailed for Europe and North America. In China, the winter of 1816 killed centuries-old trees, destroyed rice harvests, and decimated water buffalo, especially in the northern regions of the country. The eruption altered the Asian monsoon cycle, resulting in massive floods in the Yangtze River Valley. Rice production in Yunnan in the southwest was devastated by the abnormally low temperatures of summer and autumn, generating widespread famine in one of the most densely populated regions on Earth. In Taiwan, which has a tropical climate, snow was recorded in Hsinchu and Miaoli, an almost unprecedented event. Frost struck Changhua. In India, the delay of the monsoons first caused drought and then torrential and disordered rains. The cholera outbreak that followed spread through Bengal, reached Moscow, and eventually became the first cholera pandemic of the modern era, with ramifications that killed millions of people over the following decades. Tambora had triggered a chain of events that crossed continents and generations. When the world seems wrong for no apparent reason, the human mind searches for explanations, and when it cannot find them in science, it turns to the sacred, the mystical, or the absurd. In 1816, volcanology was an embryonic science. The idea that a volcanic eruption could alter the global climate was unknown to most people and even to many scientists of the time. The link between Tambora and the cold would not be clearly established by science for decades. Without an accessible rational explanation, fear took other forms. Many interpreted the phenomenon as divine punishment. The strange sky, the snow in June, the frozen rivers in summer, these were signs of the end times. The wrath of God upon a humanity that had committed the crimes of decades of war and Napoleonic plunder. Preachers filled churches with desperate crowds. The number of religious conversions surged. Apocalyptic sects gained strength. And where religion was not enough, there was superstition, rituals to summon rain or warmth, collective guilt searching for a target. Collective hysteria is not born of pure ignorance. It is born of fear, and fear arises when the world ceases to behave as it should. The sequence is always the same: an inexplicable event, material loss, rumors and whispers, shared fear. Extreme behavior. When food runs out, reason weakens. And when reason weakens, humanity reveals its most primitive side: the search for scapegoats, the need to give meaning to chaos. If you had been there, watching snow fall in June, seeing your animals die of hunger, without understanding why, without radio, without television, without the internet, what would you have thought? It was during that dark summer of global collapse and despair that some remarkable creations emerged. Among them, the birth of Frankenstein in June of 1816. The poet Lord Byron rented Villa Diodati on the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. He was accompanied by his friend and fellow poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, the young Mary Godwin, who would soon become Mary Shelley, and a few other traveling companions. The plan was to enjoy the European summer. But the summer did not come. Incessant rains and an absurd cold for that time of year kept the group confined inside the villa for days on end. The sky remained overcast, volcanic haze filtered the light, and the atmosphere of constant twilight created an environment of claustrophobia and melancholy. To pass the time, Byron proposed a challenge. Each person would write the best horror story they could. It was during that climate-enforced confinement that the young Mary Shelley, then only 18 years old, had a nightmare that inspired her to create Frankenstein, the story of a scientist obsessed with creating life from death. The work, published in 1818, would make Mary Shelley one of the most influential writers in the history of literature. Lord Byron, in turn, wrote the poem Darkness, an apocalyptic and disturbing text that describes a world where the sun is extinguished, men consume one another, and the earth sinks into eternal silence. It was fiction. But those who lived through 1816 knew it was not far from reality. The invention of the bicycle on the other side of Europe, in Germany, Baron Karl Drey faced a practical and urgent problem. With the massive death of horses, animals that were dying by the thousands due to the lack of oats and fodder caused by the collapse of harvests, everyday transportation had entered into crisis. The economy depended on horses. Without them, farms could not function, goods could not circulate, and people could not travel. Drey, who was an engineer and inventor, began working on an alternative, a machine for transportation that did not require animal traction. In 1817, he presented to the world the Laufmaschine, the running machine. It consisted of a wooden frame with two aligned wheels without pedals, propelled by the user's own feet. It seemed primitive, and it was. But it was the direct ancestor of the modern bicycle, one of the most transformative inventions in human history, born out of a climate crisis. The Great Migration westward in North America, the famine and agricultural collapse of 1816 and 1817 accelerated a movement that was already underway but took on far greater proportions: the migration of populations from the northeastern United States toward the interior and the West. Families who had lost everything, crops, livestock, reserves, decided to leave in search of more fertile lands and more stable climates. This migratory flow helped shape American territorial expansion in the following decades, becoming one of the factors that fueled the settlement of the Midwest and the Great Plains. A climate catastrophe had, inadvertently, drawn part of the human map of the United States. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I prepared for you a list of the 10 worst volcanic eruptions of all time, the ones that caused the most deaths worldwide. 10th place. In 1902, the Santa Maria volcano in Guatemala killed 6,000 people. 9th place. In 1586, the Khalid volcano in Indonesia killed 10,000 people. 8th place. In 1783, the Laki volcano in Iceland killed 10,000 people, and its emissions of particles and sulfur caused widespread deaths and famine throughout Europe and Africa. 7th place. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius in Italy killed 13,000 people. 6th place. In 1792, the Unzen volcano in Japan killed 15,000 people. 5th place. In 1600, the Huayna Putina volcano in Peru killed 15,000 people and may have contributed to the famine of 1601 to 1603. 4th place. In 1985, the Nevado del Ruiz volcano in Colombia killed 23,000 people. 3rd place. In 1902, Mount Pelée in Martinique killed 30,000 people. 2nd place. In 1883, the Krakatoa volcano in Indonesia killed 36,000 people. 1st place. In 1815, the Tambora volcano in Indonesia killed more than 70,000 people and caused the year without a summer, which resulted in a great famine in Europe and America, killing thousands of people. The year without a summer came to an end. The particles from Tambora slowly settled back to the Earth's surface. The veil dissipated. The sun returned. Temperatures normalized. But the scars remained in economies, in populations, in cultural memory, and more subtly, in migration patterns, in literary works, and in the inventions that emerged from that chaos. And the question that year left for posterity is uncomfortable because it remains absolutely relevant. What would happen if something similar occurred today? Today, the world has satellites that monitor volcanoes in real time. It has climate models capable of predicting hours or days in advance the impacts of eruptions in different regions. It has global trade networks that allow food to be transported from one continent to another in a matter of days. But it also has something that 1816 did not: a global population of 8 billion people. Cities with tens of millions of inhabitants, radically dependent on supply chains that stretch across continents. An energy infrastructure that depends on stable weather. An industrial agriculture that, despite all its productivity, remains deeply vulnerable to severe climate variations. Science has advanced. Technology has advanced. But vulnerability has not disappeared. It has merely changed shape. In 1816, humanity was fragile because it depended directly on the land. In 2024, it may be fragile for different reasons: dependence on power grids, on fossil fuels, on global logistical systems that, in the face of a sufficiently large disruption, can collapse in cascade. What Tambora taught us is not only about volcanology or climatology. It is about the fragility of civilization in the face of forces we do not control. It is about what happens when stability, that thing we take for granted, the silent assumption behind all human organization, is suddenly taken away from us without warning. In 1816, a mountain awakened and the entire world felt it. The year without a summer reminds us that civilization, no matter how advanced, still depends on forces it does not control. Perhaps the most unsettling question is this: are we truly prepared for something like this today? Now I would like to hear from you. Were you already familiar with this episode of history? What surprised you the most in this narrative? And in your opinion, how would the world react if a similar event happened in our time? Leave your comment below. Your participation enriches the discussion and helps build a community of people passionate about history and knowledge. If you enjoyed this content, leave your like. It helps the channel reach more people. And if you are not yet subscribed, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We are just beginning this journey through the great events that shaped humanity.
In the next documentary, I will talk about the Dancing Plague, which took place in France in 1518. Sure, you will be shocked by this story on History and Facts. See you then.